Good afternoon. I'm Eugene Scott, a political reporter with the Washington Post political analysis blog called The Fix. So glad to have my guests here with me today to discuss how higher education will move forward in this current moment that we're having nationally. My first guest is President Mary Schmidt Campbell. She's the leader of Spelman College, and we're going to discuss how this historically Black college in Atlanta is adjusting to this current moment. Welcome. So glad to have you.
Thank you, Eugene. It's so nice to be here.
Awesome, awesome. And so first, I want to start off with the fact that you decided to move fall classes to online. Can you talk to me a bit about how you came up with that decision?
So this decision was one that we came to as a group, as a community. And at the outset, we put together a task force that had our faculty, we had staff, we had some students, we had some recent alumni. And we looked at the facts. We decided that we were going to be data driven. And so when we set out to begin the task force, to begin the work of the task force in Georgia and in the city of Atlanta, the infection rates were much lower than they are now. And so we looked at the infection rates, we looked at the size of the campus, we looked at the facilities we had for residential life, and we made the determination we can bring back our first year class, and in the spring, hopefully bring back our first year class and our seniors. So that was our first determination that we could do that safely. And because we have, as part of the Atlanta University Center, a very fine medical center, Morehouse School of Medicine, we had great guidance in terms of the protocols, the preventive practices we'd have to put into place, the testing, the tracing, everything that we'd have to put into place to make this work. So we felt very good about it. And we issued the plan, published it with great fanfare. And then we sat back and we watched the numbers go up day after day. The infection rates, the hospitalization rates, the morbidity rates. And as we looked at a map of the United States, we could see our state first going from sort of a neutral color to orange to bright red. And pretty soon we realized that we were in the middle of a hot spot. And that forced all of us to come back together again and take a look at the data and really ask ourselves some very hard questions. And primarily the question, can we safely bring back a community of students? Can we safely bring back our workforce? Our students are predominantly Black, our workforce is predominantly Black. Can we bring them back safely and ensure their health and well-being? And we made the determination that we simply could not, given the status of the city. And what made it even more complicated was the fact that our city of Atlanta, our mayor had one point of view about wearing masks and social distancing, and our governor had another point of view. So we also thought that the clash and conflict of policy was also not healthy. So we made the decision that the best thing that we could do was to transition to exclusively online.
How have students and families responded to that change? Has it affected enrollment numbers in any way?
Well, I have to say, when we first announced that we were going to have hybrid, there was great concern because everybody wanted to be the group who was chosen to be on campus. So there was a plausible argument for having first year, and there was a powerful argument for having sophomores, and equally powerful for juniors and seniors, or by deciding by majors, those majors perhaps who needed access to labs, or those majors who were in the performing arts and needed to have in-person facilities, felt very strongly that they should be the ones who are given priority. So there was a lot of concern about who among the 2,000, which 600 of our students would be permitted to go on campus. So we had a lot of conversation and explaining and discussions. I held town halls on a regular basis to guide our constituency through the rationale on which we made our decisions. Interestingly enough, when we made the decision to go exclusively online, we put inside of the communication that we sent a great deal of quantitative data, data that looked at those infection rates, looked at those hospitalization rates, compared the rates in Georgia with places which were considered much safer, and we presented all of that data. And when we made the decision to go exclusively online, I was pleasantly surprised to find that many in our community actually felt relieved. And so now we're undergoing the process of collecting our deposits, collecting our fees for the semester. And so far, we are pleasantly surprised that the enrollment at this point is running ahead of what it was last year at this time. It's still too early for us to say one way or another as to whether or not we are going to hit our enrollment target, but right now we are on track to do so.
Awesome, awesome. And so one of the hallmarks of a Spelman College education is that you have small class sizes in, a liberal arts setting, because you get to interact with the teacher in perhaps ways that you may not at a much larger, maybe even public university. Are you doing anything in particular to prepare professors and other educators on how to educate and teach online? I just imagine that's very different from teaching even in a small class setting.
Now that's a great question. I mean, you come to college certainly to get an education, but you also come to college to establish relationships. And those relationships are very often with the faculty, they're with your fellow students, they're with staff, they're with the alumni who are in the community. And these relationships can last a lifetime. They're part of the foundation of you coming of age, and particularly for our students, coming of age as a Black woman and coming of age as a Black woman in this country. So we thought very, very carefully about how we would make sure that students would be able to continue to forge those relationships, not only in the classrooms, but in some of the co-curricular activities and some of their student organizations. So our faculty have been working literally around the clock all summer long. Honestly, our faculty were not able to even take a break this summer, but they've been working round the clock to make sure that they were converting their in-person teaching styles to a style that was suitable to online instruction. Understanding the technology, understanding what resources were available to them, making sure they were making full use of our learning management system. And it's not only the faculty that have to get used to online, but when we surveyed our students, we realized that almost 80% of them had never studied online. So we had to provide some training and some orientation to our students for how to make best use of the online world. We're also realizing that we have to do a lot of thinking and a lot of work when it comes to making sure that we're keeping our community together. So we spent a great deal of time during the summer coming up with some really fantastic virtual experiences. So for example, one of our faculty offered to host virtual internships in data science. And we took 40 students, we had 240 applications for them. We took 40 students, we put each of them in a different division. Some were in humanities, some were in the arts, some were in social sciences, and some were in STEM. And the students worked together as a team of 10. There were 4 teams of 10. And at the end of their internship, they had to present their projects. And so I attended the presentation and I was blown away. It was clear that these students had, first of all, they had chosen real world problems. They had discovered some really important data sets and gotten access to them because so much material now is archived digitally. And they did an analysis, they did data visualization, they did these extraordinary presentations that were really revelatory of different aspects in their different divisions. So we realized that, we can accomplish a great deal. We can't do things the same way we've done them as we would in person, but we can still help our students discover relationships with each other, discover new knowledge, and really have an exciting learning experience.
That's encouraging. I want to go to an audience question. We have one from Tara Payne from New Hampshire that I think is kind of interesting. She says, how do you see remote K through 12 learning impacting college enrollment next year? Do you see virtual high school impacting how colleges evaluate students? I imagine she means in, the admissions process.
Yeah, I think this is a great question, not only for the admissions process, but for the whole K through 12 experience. For the same reason that we love to have students here on campus, because we know that they're coming of age, and this is a time of development and growth and gaining independence for them. We know that for K through 12, the same thing is the case. So the fact that students now have to be educated in isolation, away from their social groups, away from their friends, away from their relationships with their in-person relationships with their teachers, it does pose some concerns for the K through 12 experience in the first place. Then those concerns get magnified when we consider how we, as colleges and universities, then assess the performance of students in K through 12. So I think that's a real challenge, and we don't have the answer to that question completely. It's a question that we are discussing, a question we're thinking about. How do we do that? How do we make sure? What do we ask for? Should we continue to ask for ACTs and SATs? How do we assess? How do we evaluate students? So all of these questions are under consideration, and we have a very short period of time to come up with the answers to them, because the new admission cycle will begin in a few weeks.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We know that historically, HBCUs have played such an important role in Black America and America as a whole, particularly when it comes to building wealth in Black Americans and helping Black Americans enter into the middle class. But we also know many HBCUs, especially some of those that are not as well known, are really struggling for funds right now. And quite frankly, we're struggling even before this pandemic and economic downturn. What do you see as being one of the biggest challenges that HBCUs are currently facing in this moment?
So I think the question of long-term financial stability is one that faces many colleges and universities across this country. We have a business model that's not sustainable. And that business model basically says, for those of us who are tuition dependent, and most colleges are tuition dependent. There are only a handful, 40, 50 or so, that have endowments large enough that they don't have to be tuition dependent. But the other several thousands of us do not. That business model has required all of us to just continually and gradually increase our tuition year after year. For HBCUs, this becomes a particularly critical problem because the demographic from which we get our students, the median annual income is somewhere around $54,000, $56,000 a year, and it's not growing. The net worth of Black families is not growing. Net worth of the average Black family is $17,000. The average net worth of the average white family is $170,000. So we begin with a community and a population that already has serious constraints in terms of income and in terms of wealth. And our business models tell us to just keep increasing the tuition more and more. So this makes it, if we continue at that rate, we're going to make our college education less affordable for our students. So at Spelman, actually 2 years ago, long before we even knew that even the possibility of a COVID, a public health crisis, we had started looking very seriously for alternative sources of revenue for the college, ways in which we would lessen and mitigate the impact of our tuition and begin to build new sources. So in fact, we were ready this year to launch an online platform that is of courses that were directed not just at our students. We do have online courses for our students, but not just at our students, but for the workforce. That is the age 30 to 45 and 50 workforce, to help people retool, to help them perhaps sharpen skills, to help them perhaps attain credentials that will help them in their job search or change jobs, because we knew that we were no longer be able to depend on an annual increase of even 2 or 3%. That in 10 years, that would make our tuition untenable and out of reach. So when you look, that's the fundamental problem that we suffer as HBCUs. And what it requires is not only that we look for other sources of revenue, but it requires things like what Patty Quillen and Reed Hastings did. And that is to make a major philanthropic investment. And it was extraordinary, and it was fantastic, and it set the bar. And it was made in the context of the fact that if you took all of the HBCUs together, all 103 of us, and you looked at all of the philanthropic dollars from 2018, it was $321 million. Here in Atlanta, one college, Emory University, in that year had a gift of $400 million. If you looked at all the other colleges and universities, non-HBCUs, their collective fundraising was something like $46 billion. So the gap in terms of philanthropy, in terms of what's available in private philanthropy and public spending, many of our HBCUs are public institutions. They're funded by the state, but they don't get the same level of state funding as other colleges and universities supported by the state. So you look at all of the disparities of funding, the disparities of public funding, the disparities of private philanthropy, and you have to ask the question: where are the values of the country? Mm-hmm. We know that this population is growing, and we know that HBCUs have phenomenal success. We produce the highest percentages of STEM graduates and lawyers and doctors and judges, and yet there is a resistance, or there has been up to now, in supporting these colleges at the same level as we get support for other colleges and universities.
Your comments about the values of the country makes me think of one of these audience questions that we received that I want to turn to from Ann Rhodes from New York. And she said, given the coronavirus, anti-racism protests, economic meltdown, and the climate crisis, what is the appropriate relationship between a higher education institution and the community in which it is located? How is your school speaking to these issues and educating your students and the community?
So I think that, again, that's a great question. We have here, I will speak about the Atlanta University Center Consortium. In the consortium, we have 4 colleges. We have Spelman College, which is a Black women's college. We've been around for 139 years. Right next door is Morehouse College. It's the country's only college for Black men, and they've been around for almost 150 years. Clark Atlanta University, which is a research university, and Morehouse School of Medicine. Those are the 4 colleges and universities that make up the Atlanta University Center. Morehouse School of Medicine has just opened an extraordinary medical facility. They are doing groundbreaking research on COVID and its impact on the Black community. They just got a big grant from Health and Human Services. They have assumed the responsibility with us of the testing and tracing for our entire community. So I will say first and foremost that by virtue of what we do as colleges, we are serving the community. All of us together, the undergraduate schools, I would say more than half of our collective population are Pell eligible students, that are students whose families make $40,000 or less. I mean, you consider the fact that our colleges, particularly Clark, Atlanta, and Spelman, have among the highest social mobility rates in the country. The fact that we do have those high social mobility rates, given the population that we serve, that's another extremely important service that we're doing within our community. But then over and beyond that, right up until COVID was raging, our students at Spelman College were going out and participating in a program that has turned out to be pretty revolutionary. We had about 100 students who were trained in literacy and went out into our local public schools and worked with 5th, 6th, and 7th graders. Now you may ask, why are we choosing literacy as a program to participate in as an undergraduate liberal arts college? I had a meeting with all of the principals from our local public schools, and I had them over. I invited them to the president's house, and we sat down for dinner. And I asked them to tell us, how can our colleges be most helpful to our local public schools? And to a person, elementary, middle school, and high school, those principals said to me, teach our students how to read. So we organized this program. We trained our students. We sent them out weekly into these public schools in 5th, 6th, and 7th grades. And over a 2-year period, we looked at the results, and the results were as high as 20% improvements in their reading literacy rates. We have another program that we are in the process of trying to put together in mathematics that would do the same thing for math proficiency. So this is at least one way that we know that as liberal arts colleges with these bright, talented undergraduates, we can go out into our communities and we can make a material difference in the lives of the K through 12 students in these communities.
Oh, that's pretty amazing. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. I have so many more questions, but not enough time. But Dr. Campbell, I so appreciate you taking time to speak with us and to share everything that's happening at Spelman with our viewers. I wish you much success this school year.
Thank you so much, Scott. Great to be here.
Thanks. If you'll please stay tuned, I'll have Dr. Pollard with me from Montgomery County in a minute.
Our students, they don't pop in for 8 or 9 months out of a year and live in a residence hall and they go back to where they came from. They live here, they work here, they raise families here. So as a result of that, the wealth and health of our community is a direct reflection of the health of our community college and vice versa. There's a mutuality to that that demands that we rise up in these moments.
Welcome back. I'm Eugene Scott, a political reporter for The Fix at the Washington Post. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the path forward in higher education during the COVID-19 pandemic. My next guest is the president of Montgomery College here in Montgomery County, Maryland, Dr. Darian Pollard. And we want to welcome you to Washington Post Live.
Well, thank you so much, Eugene. I'm delighted to be here.
Good. Well, we have a lot of questions we want to get to you, get your response to for our viewers, and hopefully you could just jump right in there. And so number one, most classes at Montgomery College will be virtual, but some lessons will be taught in person. How are you deciding which classes will be in person and which ones will be primarily online?
One of the things we decided early on when we saw the pandemic starting to rage in our community, we made very deliberate steps to articulate to our students our commitment to them, both as students, but also as consumers. And as a result of that, we knew we needed to articulate to them early on what the issues were, and more importantly, provide them with effective pathways to navigate their academic career. So as a result of that, in March, we went to what we called a structured remote learning emergency, where students were asked to and had to participate in the rest of their courses in a remote fashion. We did the same thing over the summer. And what we realized is that the majority of our classes, we offer approximately 3,000 sections of courses in the fall, over 150 different courses. But I will tell you is that there are just certain courses that you can't deliver in an online environment based on some external accreditation guidelines. So some of our programs in our biotechnology program, automotive technology, certainly in the health sciences, and a lot of our other science courses, there's a requirement for a lab experience. So we have about 5% of our classes that we will be delivering in some form of a face-to-face, where we're going to be having a series of health precautions there. Students will have the opportunity to come in different days of the week, not all the students in the class at one time. We're literally doing wayfinding in a building where students enter one way, they exit one way. They're required to have face coverings and masks. We have very deliberate hand washing routines and just very different strategies we're using to help students be safe, but also help our faculty and staff remain safe. Because if we bring students back, we also know that the faculty who teach them, who are committed, who want to be there to support their students, are also supported by staff who help keep the buildings clean, help keep themselves safe, support the laboratory experiences the students have, and most importantly, help students meet the needs that they have as community college students. Our students' lives are very complex. They require that at this moment, as I said, as you saw in the clip, that we rise up. And what I'm very proud of is that Montgomery College continues to demonstrate our ability to do that over and over and over again.
You read my mind, because I was going to ask you about the safeguards that you are putting in place to protect students and professors and other people in the education field. But also you got into a bit about the importance of Montgomery College and the relevance of its work right now. We know a lot has changed in the world of community colleges in the last few years, with more people recognizing that, a 2-year associate's degree is a viable road and option to getting a job versus a 4-year degree, or perhaps combining them both. How has Montgomery College capitalized and taken advantage of this awareness?
Eugene, I love your question for a couple of reasons. One is that we know the community colleges were founded for this purpose right now. And what isn't a part of the broader higher education narrative is that 40% of undergraduates in this country attend a community college. They do that because for many of our students, we are local choices for high quality, excellent education. We are in the community. I love listening to my colleagues talk about the value and richness of students who attend their institutions. And we talk about the fact that our students in community colleges, they actually come from the community. We are situated within there. We are anchor institutions in our community. So for many of our students, the option of going away to school is not something they will do because many of them simply can't afford it. Many of our students also have family dynamics that require them to stay local. But what we also forget is that we tend to serve also the working adult. The average age of our students continues to go up. So as a result of that, we know that we have to provide affordable, high quality education in the communities that we serve. And for many of our students, first generation college students, new immigrants to this country, first in their family to go to school. We know that many people of color find their way through and to higher education through their community colleges. For us, it's a very deliberate act of community love. The fact that we exist here, that we provide not only faculty who teach courses that rival what you may see at any 4-year institution across this nation, but we have staff and support services that meet students where they are. I find myself quite amazed as I think about some of the statistics that we look at as it relates to students during this recent pandemic. about 40% of our students reported having some form of food insecurity. Many of them have housing insecurity. We had just this past weekend a conference for single parents, and we're doing it in this virtual environment because the complexity of students' lives belie the dominant narrative that you see in higher education. Most students are not 18 years old, going away where parents are going to be sending them care packages and visiting on weekends to go to the football game. Most community college students and most students who are undergraduates in this country are not 18. Most of them are having very complex lives. Many of them are parenting, living in poverty, they're learning English while at the same time trying to capture their portion of the American dream. And what often happens, why I so embrace this question that you asked, is that the community colleges, we are the community's response to that. If you want to see how healthy and how well a community is, you look at the health and wellness of its community college. There's a mutuality, there's a symbiotic relationship there, because we are indeed a reflection of the communities that we serve.
Speaking of the community you serve, we know that across the nation this summer we have seen conversations and uprisings and protests related to issues of racism and low views of diversity in this country. And we saw protests even in Montgomery County. And we know Montgomery College is one of the most diverse community colleges in the country. What are some of the challenges that you feel like your students may be having right now in this moment, and how is the college responding to that?
Well, Eugene, we are gloriously diverse, as I like to say. 75% of my students are students of color, and we have students from over 160 countries who choose to attend. In fact, the Chronicle of Higher Education named us as the most diverse community college in the continental United States. So we relish, we embrace, we lean into this glorious diversity that we have because we know we're made better for that. But also in that space, you also have to recognize your role as being the truth teller, where you create space and intentionality for students, faculty, and staff to understand what this means. So we know that this country right now is beset as we're dealing with multiple pandemics. We're certainly dealing with COVID-19 and its effects on the health of our country and our nation, dare our globe. But I will also tell you, we're also fighting the pandemic of racism and white supremacy. And as a result of that, what you see happening right now is that one is magnifying the issues of the other. We certainly see, as our president from Spelman talked about earlier, the tremendous adverse impact that we're seeing that COVID is having on Black and Brown communities. So as a community college, if I, again, love my community, I don't get to ignore the fact that this is being adversely impacted. I don't get to ignore the fact that I have members of my community, students, faculty, and staff who need a place to problematize, to understand, to discuss, to work through issues and calls for social justice. And what I love about this is that, again, we're institutions that step into this space. We've created virtual dialogues for members of our college community. We've had hundreds in a Zoom call having very intentional conversations about race. We've had very intentional interactions and reading groups that have taken place. So we understand, we know this. This is the work we've been doing for some time. And as a result of that, I'd like to say that we specialize in trying to make sure that we create safe spaces for our communities to have these types of conversations, to be intentional, though, in crafting solutions. So one of the things we do is we work with our local community to create philanthropic opportunities to help support and create pathways for those who traditionally been underrepresented, not only in access to higher education, but in completion of higher education. We're very deliberate in trying to partner to create mentoring relationships, internships, job opportunities. All of these things are a part because we refuse to be the type of institution that puts out a statement and says, we support Black lives and Black Lives Matter, but Black Lives Matter have to matter inside the academy. They have to matter in our hiring. They have to matter when it comes to having conversations about social justice. Black lives, brown lives, trans lives, all lives matter in a way that allows us to magnify this mission of intentional higher education, locally based, that is affordable, but more importantly, meeting the needs of the community that we serve. So yes, we're working through this, but what I love about Montgomery College is that each and every day, we try to figure out what that looks like for us and how we can make the conversation richer, better, and deeper.
Your comment about virtual dialogues and Zoom calls makes me think of an audience question that I want to take some time to get to from Alexis Holcomb, who is in Virginia. She asked, how are you supporting students who might have inadequate access to Wi-Fi?
You know, Alexis, you must know community college students, because not only do our students have oftentimes lack of access to Wi-Fi, they actually have lack of access to technology devices. Again, if we know the number one barrier to college completion is not the absence of education, it's actually poverty. So as a result of that, we've done some things at Montgomery College, I think, that are pretty remarkable. Before the CARES funding came out, we gave away almost $900,000 between Montgomery College and Montgomery College Foundation, $900,000 to help students secure technologies, pay rent, buy food, have personal care necessities that they needed. And then we've also, a lot of our students come on our campus while our buildings are closed and we practice social distancing. A number of our students come in and they sit in our parking lots and use the technology. In addition to that, we've had some foundations donate to us opportunities for students to secure Wi-Fi and other technologies. And we're looking at that very deliberately for this fall. We know that many of our students don't have access to that. We had students actually completing whole papers on telephones and sending information and participating in classes as such. So we know for a fact that we have to partner. We've been very good with a number of our businesses in the community to help think about providing resources to students to do that. We also have partnered and worked deliberately with cable providers to help them articulate and understand what the needs are within our community. And then we're also looking at ways to be able to say, how can we reduce the cost of these things by, again, if a student doesn't have to buy a textbook, perhaps they can invest in Wi-Fi, or they're able to have access to other materials in their home. So we're using our resources and redirecting them. We live in a county that significantly believes in the power of education. So as a result of that, they're constantly asking us, how can they be of assistance and service? And that's one of the struggles that we're going to have to grapple with. We already had 4 to 5 degrees completely online. 6,000 students in the fall took online courses, but now 100% of our students had to do so in the spring and will do in the fall. So all 55,000 of them that we serve over the course of the year will have to be activating their learning in an online environment. And this has to be one of the national issues that we have. We see this happening all across the country, rural areas, suburban areas, urban areas, where the digital divide continues to be the great divider in our country. Something has to be done. I look forward to seeing some of our elected officials figure out ways to invest in that so that we can make sure that everyone has access to those resources that they need.
I guess given that very point, do you see online education becoming the new status quo? I mean, I know we see a lot of colleges, particularly four-year colleges, smaller colleges, that are not as experienced as Montgomery College has been with educating students online. Is it possible that higher education is moving in a direction that they won't come back from even when the pandemic is over?
You know, Eugene, that's a provocative question, because I think it speaks to this issue of knowing mission and knowing your students. And I think a number of our students will continue to evolve. We've seen the online education space continue to evolve, and institutions that hadn't already started that work, to a certain extent, shame on you, because we saw this happening. Online courses started a year ago, then, about a decade ago. Then you started seeing whole degrees online. You started seeing whole universities being offered completely online. So I do believe that we will be changed from this. The path forward certainly includes online education, but it also requires us to have online support services. And it also recognizes certain students will not learn well in this type of environment. They will need that hands-on, face-to-face experience. So I think we're going to see more often the rise of the hybrid institution, where there will be students, particularly millennials and others who've grown up in this environment. I have a 13-year-old. He thinks nothing about taking school completely in an online environment, actually prefers it to a certain extent. This will be normative for them. It will be natural as part of their origin story. For many other students, this is not. This is a struggle for them. So they will prefer to have an environment where they're completely face-to-face. And then there are going to be others, maybe a Gen Xer like me and a few you. Others are going to say, you know what, I need a little bit of both. And I think the institutions that will survive from this moment are going to be ones that make the investment in all of that. You look at the retail that has survived. Many of them who are surviving are trying to embrace hybrid models where they're having face-to-face experiences, but also doing high e-commerce. I think the same thing is going to be the case for us in higher education, and particularly community colleges, again, where our students are very complex. Their lives or their stories, their work environments are different, and their time is going to be so tremendously impacted by work and so forth. So I do believe that we're going to have more robust online services and programs, certainly courses that speak to the needs of students. But I also think we want to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind and still have those face-to-face environments. I think our buildings will look different, our services will look different, but at the end of the day, the institutions that will be going forward be those that do all of those things very well.
I'm a little interested in what fall enrollment numbers look like. Are you seeing a spike in interest? Are people who would normally go to a more traditional four-year campus deciding, hey, I might as well go to a community college that offers similar programs? Are people saying, hey, I will wait until after the pandemic and then enroll in Montgomery College? What's happening with that right now?
You know, Eugene, what's very remarkable about this is a couple of things. When we started this pandemic readiness back in March, we put together a set of about 14 assumptions. And the one assumption that none of us, all in higher ed, if you look at every higher education trade paper, they're all trying to figure out what fall is going to look like. What we knew is that it was going to look different, and we needed to be agile and have a strategy going into it, to be very deliberate, and again, talk to our students ahead of time and let them know. I struggle now when I read about the number of institutions that are letting students know this week that classes aren't going to start in a week or two. I struggle with the integrity of the institutions that do that. What I know for us is that if I look at summer enrollment, we were up 11% in enrollment this summer. As I look at fall, we simply just don't know. So we have a little wager going on at the institution. I'm happy to be even with our projections. There's some who believe we'll probably be either 10% down or 10% up based on the mobility. What I do know is just this morning while sitting here, I've had 3 different text messages from community members saying, hey, my kid was going to X university this fall. We realize that they're going to be taking online classes. Doesn't make any sense. And I respond back, wise decision. Lower division classes, freshman and sophomore, take them at your local community college for a fraction of the cost that you're going to pay without a teaching assistant, having a high quality faculty member who has been trained over the summer. They had over 700 faculty in training this summer to make sure they were prepared to do these types of courses with the support services that we have. I think that's actually a sign of family genius that you would choose to do that. So I'm very hopeful about what this portends for our enrollment, but I also recognize that some families will make a choice for a gap year. Some families may say that they're going to go and have to work because even for them, some families, the idea of paying a community college tuition may not be something they can even afford. So I hope that maybe in a couple of weeks, you'll come back and talk with me and I can tell you what this looks like for Montgomery College.
Well, I hope so as well. It's been a pleasure talking to you today and learning more about how Montgomery College is responding to this moment. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
And thank all of you for watching. It's been great having this conversation before you and getting some of your questions as well. Tomorrow at noon Eastern Standard Time, my colleague, the great Jonathan Capehart, is going to interview the former mayor of Minneapolis, Betsy Hodges, and they're going to discuss race in America. So you don't want to miss that. I know that I won't. Head to WashingtonPostLive.com for all of the details and more information about our programming. I'm Eugene Scott. Thanks for watching.